And welcome to the fourth annual Catholic Intellectual Tradition Symposium. I'm Tim Gabrielli, privileged to serve as Gudorf Chair in Catholic Intellectual Traditions, and along with my colleague, Dr. Sandra Yoakum, over there in Green, University Professor of Faith and Culture, we're really happy to co-sponsor the symposium. Really, this is an annual celebration of research and creative projects around UD, across the units, from undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, and really in the context of this more than 2,000 year long conversation that we call the Catholic Intellectual Tradition. UD participates in that as a Catholic university. I think one of the distinctive things about inquiry in the Catholic intellectual tradition is that it emphasizes the integration of faith and reason, and that our intellectual work, our intellectual reflection and research is really about unfolding the beauty and love and goodness of God in our world. And so CIT is like a space, a forum in which our questions, including our deepest ones, can be wrestled with, explored, probed. And I think if you look over the program for today, and we'll be here all day again tomorrow, you'll see some of the variety of ways in which UD folks come at the Catholic intellectual tradition, which was really enlightening to me. So our next presentation is a subset of the presentations at the symposium, and the subset is McGrath Award winners. So my office is pleased to sponsor the McGrath Award, which is named in honor of UD alumnus Father Jack McGrath. Father McGrath was a dedicated teacher who celebrated and embodied Marianist education in the Catholic intellectual tradition. A vowed Marianist himself, his illustrious career spanned about 60 years. He taught high schoolers and undergraduates and graduate students in a range of disciplines, including math, American history, and theology. Among many other roles in the Society of Mary, he served as a faculty member at UD beginning in 1987, where he founded the Forum on the Catholic Intellectual Tradition Today, which is continued in the Office of the University Professor of Faith and Culture. So the McGrath Award recognizes students whose research in a common academic program, a CAP class, demonstrates careful, deep, and creative engagement with thinkers, texts, and/or themes associated with Catholic intellectual traditions. So having applied this past fall semester with work completed in a CAP course either in spring, summer, or fall 2023, this year's recipients were selected from a very strong pool of submitted research projects. The committee had a really difficult time. It was so much good work, and what a testament to our work engaged with the Catholic intellectual tradition here in the Common Academic Program, and particularly for our awardees. So each recipient receives a $750 award, along with a special medallion. I have Lucy's here. This is going to be really hard for you to see back there, but on the front of this medallion is an image of a small statue, actually, that was very dear to Father McGrath. We tried to find out. It's a little carved piece, and we were looking for its provenance. We think we found out that it was from a general council of the Marianists in Rome in 1973. Its image is here on the front of this medal. It's Mary's Seat of Wisdom, which is an ancient title for Mary, with Jesus sitting on her lap. And I think it reminds us all who stand in the Marianist tradition of education that we esteem the pursuit of wisdom as an encounter with God. So let me introduce Lucy Waskiewicz, one of this year's winners in the junior-senior category. Lucy is a senior from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, majoring in English and communication with a concentration in media production. She's also pursuing a minor in creative writing. Outside of class, she's the news editor for Flyer News, great publication you may have come across, a writer for the College of Arts and Sciences blog, and the marketing director for the Campus Activities Board. Her award-winning research, completed for the co-taught course, it's a co-taught communication religious studies course, 359, called Road to Hell, one of the best course titles I think we have, with Professors Meghan, Henning, and Bob Joseph. Her title, as you can see, is Excavating the Sunken Places, analyzing Jordan Peele's Get Out as apocalyptic rhetoric comparable to Greek Hades. And so without further ado, I will give Lucy her award and turn things over to her.
Thank you, Dr. Gabrielli, and thank you everyone so much for being here. Like Dr. Gabrielli said, my name is Lucy Waskiewicz, and my project is titled Excavating the Sunken Places, Analyzing Jordan Peele's Get Out as Apocalyptic Rhetoric Comparable to Greek Hades. So before I get started, I'd like to thank the McGrath Award Committee once more for recognizing my work and honoring me with this award. I'm so grateful to be here. I'd also like to thank Dr. Joseph and Dr. Henning, who were the co-instructors of the course I took last spring called The Road to Hell, in which this project was developed. Despite Dr. Henning beginning every class session with "Hi everyone, welcome to hell," it was a really incredible course, and I'm very thankful for their support of my research. So, like I said, this was developed as the final project for The Road to Hell, in which we were instructed to compare a piece of ancient apocalyptic rhetoric to a more modern piece of media and draw a thesis from that comparison. As you can see from my title, I chose to compare Jordan Peele's Get Out, which came out in 2017, to Greek Hades in the classical depictions that we'd studied all year. So this was developed as a presentation. It wasn't a paper or anything of the sort, so I'll just be presenting it to you as I did to my class. And before I get started, I'd like to clarify, when I refer to apocalyptic rhetoric, I'm referring to the study or use of apocalyptic texts, written, oral, or visual. And when I refer to the apocalypse, I mean generally the end of the world and the concept of afterlives, just so you're all caught up. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. We're just going to run through a quick agenda, and I think we'll have time at the end for questions if anyone has any. So again, thank you all for being here, and I hope you find this as interesting as I did. So just to begin with my thesis, you're welcome to follow along. Jordan Peele's Get Out and the ancient Greek underworld Hades are comparable pieces of apocalyptic rhetoric due to their shared iconography of chasm-like settings, the intermix between the living and the unhappy dead, and the presence of monsters and demons that bestow punishment on God offenders. Reframing Get Out through an apocalyptic lens speaks to the importance of its social context, which is the Black experience in 2017 America, and emphasizes the significance of its message in film and as a common experience. So just to start off, we're going to summarize both Hades and Get Out for those who might be unfamiliar. So beginning with Hades, Hades is the Greek underworld. It is a very gloomy place of the dead, and it's ruled by a god of the same name, Hades. Characteristics of those who make journeys through Hades include guides, obstacles, famous dead characters, and the presence of monsters and demons. In Hades, not all characters are being punished, but those who have offended the gods at some point in their lives absolutely are. And in terms of geography, which will be important later in my presentation, in Hades we've got the upper realm or entrance of Erebus. There's the lowest realm, Tartarus, which is where the evildoers, god offenders are punished. There's Elysium for the heroes, and then there's Asphodel Meadows for the mediocre, sort of everyone else. So moving right along into Get Out, for those who haven't seen it, maybe it's been a while, a Black photographer named Chris Washington, who's depicted in the slide right there, accompanies his white girlfriend named Rose Armitage to her wealthy family's home. The family's immediately a bit off-putting and overly accommodating, but then more strange events begin to occur, including a party-goer at the Armitage's party who has a bit of a breakdown, and then Missy Armitage puts Chris involuntarily into hypnotherapy. We'll study those later more in my presentation, but these ultimately are strange enough that Chris attempts to leave the home, but the Armitages lock him in and hypnotize him, including Rose, who's been on it since the beginning. They prepare to perform an experiment on him called transmutation, in which they surgically implant the brain of an old white man who bought Chris into Chris's body, thus creating Chris's body as sort of a vessel to continue this man's life. This is an ongoing plot by the Armitages. This isn't the first time they've done it, and at the end of the film, Chris barely escapes. So now we're moving a bit into the meat of my research, which is comparing the apocalyptic iconography between ancient Hades and Get Out. So we'll be comparing three different sets of iconography. We'll start with Hades as the established piece of apocalyptic rhetoric, then see how the iconography translates into Get Out. So the first piece of iconography we'll be looking at is the presence of chasm-like settings. In Hades, we'll study this part first. This is Tartarus. As I stated before, there are two main realms of Hades, which is the upper Erebus and the lower Tartarus. Erebus being the entrance, Tartarus being the place of torture and punishment. The poet Hesiod, a Greek poet of Homer's time, described Tartarus as this dark and endless abyss, and he uses a couple descriptors I put right here, which is that the Greek sky god threw the rebellious Cyclops into Tartarus as a form of punishment when they rebelled. It is a place as far below the earth as the earth is below the sky. It would take an anvil falling from heaven 18 days to reach the bottom, and Tartarus is, quote-unquote, surrounded by night. So in terms of taking this comparison to Get Out, the chasm-like setting in Get Out would be the sunken place. For those of you who haven't seen the film or aren't familiar, we'll watch a quick clip so you can sort of see what it is. But the sunken place is sort of a state of mental hypnosis that Missy Armitage, the Armitage mother, throws Chris in involuntarily, keeping him subdued. So we'll watch a quick clip on the next slide, sort of showing the first time Chris is sent into the sunken place, and then we'll return to this slide and do a little comparison.
Just like that day when you did nothing. You did nothing. Now, sink into the floor. Wait. Sink. Just like that.
Okay, so hopefully you have a better idea of what the sunken place looks like. But as you can see, there are immediate similarities between this depiction of the sunken place and the Tartarus that Hesiod described. I put them in color so you can see them visually, but Chris is, like the Cyclops, thrown there by Missy Armitage without his consent. It is visually this bottomless abyss, and it's also, like Hesiod said, Tartarus is surrounded by night. It's endlessly dark. So by this logic, if the sunken place is Tartarus, the Armitage home and their property must become Erebus, because it is where Chris must pass through. It is the entrance to enter Tartarus. This also is represented by the fact that this initial sending Chris into the sunken place is the turning point of the film that represents his descent into anguish. After Missy Armitage subdues him into the sunken place the first time, she's now able to do so at a whim, through which she can keep him subdued for the previously mentioned transmutation process. So it's sort of a turning point, like those who are being cast into Tartarus, into these trials and tortures that await the person who is entering the sunken place. So moving right along into the next piece of apocalyptic iconography, it's the mingling of the living and the unhappy dead. Again, we'll begin with Hades, and then we'll move into Get Out's equivalent. So in Hades, humans can travel into the underworld and interact with the dead. This is most famously seen in Homer's The Odyssey, in which Odysseus communicates with the dead, whom he summons to the mouth of a cave. It's made very distinctly clear in the Odyssey and in other pieces of ancient Greek texts that the dead in Hades, regardless of where they're at, are extremely unhappy. This is depicted when Odysseus sees Achilles, a war hero, who's died in the Trojan War and is currently residing in the hero's Elysium. Achilles is extremely distraught with his state, and Odysseus attempts to comfort him, saying, "You're treated like royalty here." However, Achilles very famously replies, he would rather be a wretched farmer's serf than lord over the exhausted dead. And then finally, with the intermix between the living and the dead will Odysseus away very vehemently. His mother, Anticlea, says, "Go back to the light of day as soon as you can." They're very distraught by the fact that this living person is in this place of such sorrow. So, to switch gears back to Get Out, I'm going to, for the purposes of this research, I dubbed the transmutated people that inhabit the Armitage property as dead. There are 3 of them. There's a man named Andre, who we'll see in a clip later, and then there are the Armitage grandparents. To remind you, this is a black person who has had the body of a white person, or the brain of a white person put into their body, thus they are not of autonomous mind and body, being, again, for the purposes of research, dead. In this case, the living would be of those of autonomous mind and body. So the transmutated people do, again, consistently interact with the non-transmutated people on the Armitage property. Very famously, there's an interaction between Chris and Andre, in which Chris approaches Andre at a party. Andre acts very bizarrely. He's a transmutated person. It's not his brain and his body. So later, Chris attempts to take a photo of Andre, and which triggers Andre to have sort of an episode in which his true consciousness rises to the surface, and he attempts to warn Chris away from the Armitage home. So we're going to watch a quick clip of that, just so we get familiar with that again, and then we'll return to this slide.
Get out. Sorry, man. Okay. Get out! Yo! Now! Yo! Get out! Get
Okay, so again, there are very distinct points of connection between here. Like I said earlier, in this interaction between Chris and Andre, this isn't the first time non-transmutated people interact with transmutated people on the Armitage property. There's a consistent interaction, and as we stated previously, the Armitage property is the Erebus equivalent to Hades. Like Achilles, Andre's outburst when he's sentient expresses this really deep anguish at his current state of being. And you could argue that Chris might say in response, you're treated like royalty here. You're living with an extremely wealthy white woman. You're probably living a very comfortable life. However, this doesn't change the fact that he's extremely unhappy, extremely anguished by his current state of being. And then finally, like Anticlea and the dead in the Odyssey, he attempts to warn Chris away by very famously yelling at him to get out, get the fuck out of here. And then finally, our third piece of apocalyptic iconography is the presence of monsters and the punishment they bestow to god offenders. So again, beginning with Hades, like I said earlier, those who offend the gods in Hades those who offend the gods during their lifetime are the ones who are always being punished for their offenses in Hades. Think of Tantalus, who couldn't eat or drink. Think of Sisyphus, who's constantly rolling his boulder to the top of the hill. These are very prominent god offenders in ancient Greek texts. In Hades, there are also the presence of demons and monsters who exist solely to carry out punishment on those who offend the gods. There's Alastor, who tempts men toward evil or folly and punishes them for it. And there's also the Furies, who carry whips to administer this really vicious corporal punishment. So there isn't a clip for this particular instance, but we're just going to sort of talk through it. Dean Armitage is the father of the Armitage family, and so for the purposes of research, he here assumes the godlike position on the Armitage property equivalent of Hades. He's the one who's in charge of the transmutation process. He's the head of the family. It makes sense that they sort of look to him as their god. Subsequently, Chris offends the Armitage family god by escaping the transmutation process at the end of the film and apparently killing Dean in the process. Then, like the monsters and demons of Hades, the family members carry out these really monstrous punishments on Chris. Missy, the mother, stabs him. Jeremy, the son, tries to strangle him. Both transmutated grandparents attempt to kill him. And at the end of the film, in the final scene, Rose attempts to shoot him and then emotionally tortures him by telling him that she loves him as he tries to strangle her. So now that we've gone through the comparisons between Get Out and Hades, I'd like to examine the significance of Get Out in its respective context, 2017 America, to build up to what my conclusion ultimately states. So, for those who remember, in 2017, when the film was released, the United States faced intense polarization on race issues, and there were multiple very high-profile racism-based incidents. Most famously, in Charlottesville, North Carolina, there was a neo-Nazi white supremacist rally that ended in the death of one person. There was also a 20% increase in hate crimes from 2016. And Get Out isn't discrete. It is a very significant reflection of its context. There's a lot of racial commentary that we'll sort of examine right here. But the first being, the sunken place, aside from the metaphor we made it into in its comparison to Hades, it's also been argued to be a metaphor for the subjugation felt under a racist gaze, in that Chris is unable to move out from Missy's power once she gains control over him and is then able to manipulate him at a whim. There's also arguments that transmutation is a metaphor for the commodification of black bodies. Obviously, this is an American film. America was a country built on the commodification of black bodies through slavery. However, this is something that people say still consists and persists today. Minority incarceration has been argued to unfairly incarcerate a high number of Black people, which leads to the exploitation of their labor via private prisons. There's also a consistent fetishization and objectification of Black bodies discourse in various circles of American rhetoric. Finally, the film is also very overt in displaying Chris's experience at the White Armitage House. He's subject to a litany of microaggressions, most famously in the party scene in which he's the only Black person besides Andre. And this ultimately just depicts the Black experience of being the other in a very predominantly white setting, which plays into a larger conversation of people who find different spaces immensely difficult and unwelcoming, as opposed to those who might feel more comfortable in them. So coming sort of to our conclusion, why does this matter? What does reframing this piece of racially conscious media as a piece of apocalyptic rhetoric do for that media and do for us? When you analyze Get Out as apocalyptic rhetoric by comparing it to Hades, Chris's experience with the Armitages begins to match up with that apocalyptic iconography long before their plot to transmutate him is ultimately revealed. The realism of his experience during this time, then, the incessant microaggressions, the objectification, the fetishization, infers that in this context, real-life, daily aspects of the Black experience, which is a shared experience, can be argued to be intrinsically apocalyptic or hellish. Now, I want to be clear. What I'm not saying is that Get Out does a really good job of depicting racism to people who have and haven't experienced it in their own lives. It does that very well itself. I don't need to say that. What I'm saying is that when you reframe this as apocalyptic rhetoric, Chris didn't enter hell when he was tied up in the Armitage's basement awaiting this transmutation process. He entered hell from the moment that he stepped on the Armitage property. And this is important to us as an audience because this experience on the Armitage property, his hell, it wasn't intensely fictionalized or made up. It was the same experience that millions of Black Americans live with and endure on a daily basis. So just to recap, Get Out and Greek Hades are comparable pieces of apocalyptic rhetoric due to their shared iconography despite different important differences that highlight their respective social contexts. However, it's the initial comparison of Get Out to Greek Hades that reframes the film as this piece of apocalyptic literature and comments on its social context, which is the magnitude and consistency of the discriminatory realities of existing as a Black person in America. The significance of using ancient apocalyptic rhetoric to re-examine contemporary media can spark more re-examination of pressing social issues in the future and their impacts on the Americans that they affect. Thank you so much for listening.